Sometimes, the line between fantasy and reality becomes blurred. For good or ill, this blurring results in metagaming, where player knowledge influences character actions. The same can also apply to game masters, which is what we will be discussing tonight on Playing God. I'm Nick Logie, and with me is Xander Nolan.
Hey guys.
Metagaming. It'll crop up from time to time, and knowing how to deal with it, as well as recognizing it as something you might be doing yourself, even unconsciously, is something GMs should consider and prepare for when running a game. Let's start with player metagaming. This is, for an example, we have a character who's grown up in a remote part of a world, and they encounter some kind of monster or creature that they haven't seen before in play. This could be something like a troll, which is a very common one, and maybe the player knows that trolls have a weakness to fire or acid. The character doesn't, but the player starts making decisions as the character having that knowledge, such as throwing a torch at it or firing a flaming arrow. Xander, what kind of metagaming have you seen in your stint as either a GM or player?
Uh, Honestly, the biggest thing that crops up has got to be the instances where the line is so thin, and the difference between character knowledge and general knowledge is evident. Uh, for example, let's say your character as a player is from a kind of a backwoods area of let's use your setting, the Barbarian Wilds. Their ability to function in a large city would be compromised. They might know that there would be a tavern, but they have no idea like how to navigate a large city. They have no real experience in doing these things, and so as a character, they would be completely lost in the sauce. But as a player typically would know how to handle these kinds of situations from a realistic standpoint, and general knowledge would kind of take over. So being mindful and aware of what your character can know and what your character does know are two completely different things. He might know of cities, but he's not going to be experienced and versed in it. So the player saying, okay, so I know that this is a large city. It's got to have some kind of sewage system, and I want to use that to sneak into the castle so that I can get this book.
Exactly.
Well,
And
you
then,
wouldn't know
but
that.
yeah, you wouldn't know that. You've grown up in the barbarian wilds, just a forest. You're camping. You're doing your own thing with your tribe or whatever. And then you don't have sewage system. You don't have aqueducts. Do you know what those are? Do you know anything about engineering, Mister Random Barbarian?
Yeah, it's one of those instances where typically you just let it go as a GM. Generally because those kinds of things can interrupt the flow. The flow.
But it could also help the flow in certain instances, which is why I didn't start this out by saying metagaming is always bad. So, let's say for example that you're halfway through a campaign and one of your character dies. Like your main character is just gone. You can't resurrect him, or if you can, like there's some other wooge going on that prevents you from like maybe you got revived as a skeleton or some shit like that, necromancy, and you're trying to find a way to bring in this new character, even though you're already halfway through the campaign. You can work with both the GM and the players, and kind of sort of like meta your way into it. Like you don't want to have like, "Hey guys, how's it going? You've never met me before. We're best friends now." But kind of going along with, "Okay, I see these adventures. I want to be a part of that group. I don't know them. Let's see how I can go about like maybe bending my character a little bit so that way it would make sense for them to go approach this group and be like, "Hey, I hear you guys have a problem with like this thing in the cave. I know a little bit about it. I could help you. Let me join up."
Yeah, there's definitely moments where metagaming can help the uh, the game moving forward. Um, and GMs do it all the time. It's one of the tools in our toolboxes. And we can cover when it's appropriate and not appropriate for GMs to metagame a little bit later. But as far as player metagaming, I think it's a good rule of thumb to ask whether or not the metagaming is going to be excessively disruptive, whether or not it's going to cause any realistic trouble within the setting itself, and is it going to affect the other characters? It's a good thing if your character has some kind of knowledge about things to bone up a little bit on it yourself, because at that point in time, the out of character knowledge would be useful to you, even if it's something you're
Right.
unaware of.
And if your character doesn't know and they're in a setting where they should know, let's go back to that troll example for a second. Let's say you aren't from somewhere in the middle of the boondocks. Let's say that you grew up like near these like fucking mountain trolls, like they're harassing your city, their town. I feel like that's something that everyone would know, like about the fire weakness, like everybody, like the young farmhand would be like, I know how that works.
Oh yeah, no, totally. And it's got a lot to do with the player talking with the GM about things that they would know, and the GM making a ruling and a call on relevant general knowledge for the area.
Right.
That just
And you can, if you need to get more specific with any of the examples, like, um, that's where you could like bring in a knowledge nature roll or an arcana check even though you know that it does work, that maybe like tells you why it works.
absolutely. Um, that's a really good implementation of how skills would come into play for metagaming. On the whole, uh, where it's concerned with environmental things, which is typically the things that you come across most often. It's the player knows about a monster that they shouldn't know, as with the troll example, uh, or they know something about spelunking because they went with their friends when they were in the Boy Scouts to go cave diving, but your character hasn't.
Or they
So
find a
it's
magic item that it's like you find a sword that looks like this, and the players look through the DMG has run a game before and is like, oh, I recognize that as like the flaming tongue or whatever that thing's called,
mhm,
even though the character would
yeah,
be like, I don't know what the hell this is. It's a fancy looking sword.
yeah. Now a really good way now GMs out there, it is absolutely imperative that you take the references and the descriptions of things in the books, especially magical artifacts, and take it with a bit of a grain of salt and make it your own, so that that kind of expectation isn't there. A really good example of that is the glasses that Meepo had gotten from a traveling salesman in your game, Nick.
Hmm.
They're actually goggles of night vision, but when he saw them, they're glasses and they're magic. You don't know what they do. So flipping through the DMG, they'll be like, "They're glasses. I don't see glasses anywhere. What the? I mean, what the fuck are they?" So it keeps the player on their toes, and it allows you to keep that air of mystery. I think about
Right.
different magical items.
Even if you don't change anything mechanically, like just changing some aspect of whatever you're looking at, whether it's a monster that just happens to be maybe even a different color than you're expecting. Be like, well, wait, what does that mean now? Because if you see like, usually when you see something red, it's probably resistant to fire in some regard or another. But if you have something that's like, I don't know, fucking green, and it's the same monster, same stats and everything, so it's still resistant to fire, and somebody hits it with something fire related, like blows it up with a fireball, and it's like, well, it doesn't take that much damage. It's like, well, why is that? Why is that? Let's figure
Yeah,
this out.
yeah. Your job as GM is to help keep your players on your toes. Because one of the really big things about being a role player, in a sense, is if you are ever going to GM, the very first thing you should do is just read the books. It's the easiest way to get the knowledge that you need, and it's one of the most important aspects of the gaming uh, process itself.
Let me tell you about something that I do though, Xander, because this is
Yeah,
kind of opposite of what you just said. Uh,
but
I don't
go ahead.
read all the books. Like the monster manual, I'll flip through it, find a cool picture that I like, and be like, what CR is this? Okay. I think this might work for how I want to run this encounter. Maybe I'll read some flavor text, but I usually will stay away from the stats up until I actually need them. So that way, if I happen to be a player, I want it to be surprising to me.
Yeah, that's a good place to be if you're an experienced GM and you you can work those things on the fly. But a lot of players and GMs both alike, uh, they don't. You read through all of the books like we told you to do many episodes ago, and we keep reiterating because it's
Hmm.
important to do. But reading through the monster manual is another important thing to do, even as a player, if you're ever going to GM. But remember as a player that the thing you see is not always the thing you get, especially if you have a decent game master. And when you become a game master yourself, and you want to run different games, take that to heart. It's really important to separate what's in the books from the flavor that is your world. Because if you see a bunch of goblins running around and your player characters know for a fact goblins are always evil, they're always going to attack you, and they're always bad guys. They're always bad guys. But your players are walking through the woods and they come across a small road and they're like, hey, we'll follow the road. Few hundred feet, about 10-minute walk later, you see a broken caravan on the side of the road, and you see a bunch of little green guys jumping around, taking pieces of the wood and stuff. So what do you do? And they're like, well, they're goblins. I'm gonna go kill them. Well, okay, if you want to do that. And then after the fact, uh, come to find out when you go to the next city, goblins are uh, one of the races that they make their home there. They're nice folk. They're not particularly menacing. And the people that you just killed were actually a recovery crew that was hired by the uh, the sultan or whatever authority figure you want to add in, and you just killed all of them. So now you're in hot water, and doing one of those kinds of encounters early on will make sure your players know that things are shook up and that what you see is not going to be what you get. So that's just one of the examples that I like to use for my games. That's actually a literal thing I did once. My, my players was like, "What the fuck?"
I mean, I've done that a few times. But when it comes to, and that's a good point. Like, it's a good way to present the world, but at the same time, you don't be afraid to like straight up say at the beginning of the game, like present what when you're like pitching this game to whoever you're trying to get in on it. Like be clear that it's like things might not always be as they seem because sometimes maybe people just want to play like a crunchy munchkin, like I kick in the door, I see a goblin that's 100% evil all the time, let's get him. Like maybe they don't need to deal with all the moral quandary and all that stuff unless that's the kind of game that you and your players want to take part in.
Yeah, like a really good example is the game that you run, Nick, on Mondays. My character, Kenton, he's a reoccurring theme for this podcast. If you guys don't know Kenton, he's my player character in Nick's game Monday nights. He's a monk. He's a politician. He is the the quintessential bad at that and trying to get better sort of success story that I've kind of built over a long time. But he's at a crossroads and dealing with the very real possibility that the villain he's been chasing like for a year and a half out of game terms. So this is a long campaign. This has got a lot of investment uh, for for me and the other players, and the character is running into this wall like maybe the bad guy is not that bad of a guy. What the hell do I do? So making sure that your players are aware of that coming in, And also, if your players aren't down with that, don't try to force it on them, because that will only end in a lot of tears and a whole lot of work that you put in as a GM not coming to fruition. So
Which is why
be
you
be
want to bring
mindful.
it up even before you actually start the game. Like
Oh,
before we
absolutely.
even began that game, I made it clear. It's just like alignment isn't set in stone. It can be fluid. No, it told everybody that, and everyone was like, "Yeah, that's cool. Let's go with that." Like, it's still an important factor, but it's maybe not as hard coded as a lot of settings might have it. So you could have the goblins that are actually good aligned, but you can also have this different goblins that are evil aligned. Kind of depends. You got to get to know what you're going up against.
Yeah, as a good rule of thumb, just take the time to analyze the situation as a player, and things will be generally okay.
And the other thing is, if you something that I didn't address when I started the game, but I've been thinking about recently is player skill versus character skill. And a lot of people will say that's kind of metagamey, but there is like there is a line to be drawn where it's actually metagaming and whether or not your adventurer is just good at what he does. Like if I have a dungeon delving fighter, uh, he even though like the character's sheet doesn't say like sleight of hand or stealth or whatever to disable traps, then if the player says, "Here's how I'm looking for traps," and they start role playing like, "Okay, he's gonna take out his spear, he's gonna tap on the stones in front of him, wave it around to see if there might be any tripwires he'll cut, which will activate the traps, but will be harmless because it's in front of him." Like, if somebody describes that, then that seems reasonable to me. Because your fighter, even though he doesn't know how traps work or how to disable them, would know that these exist, they are dangerous, and I'm going to take steps in order to not die to them.
Yeah, that's just clever character thinking most of the time.
Right, but through all of that, if I heard that as a GM, I would not call for a roll.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be okay. Give me a stealth check for fifth edition, or your disable traps, your trap making kit or whatever, or a dex roll in most cases.
Right.
Uh, simply because they're gonna go off, and it's just a random assortment of maybe he didn't do it quickly enough, and this is gonna stick in his leg. The
Hmm.
whole arrow in the knee kind of thing.
And sometimes even like if the description's cool enough, like and the player thought about it enough, like there's no point in rolling. Like maybe for some numbers that need to be hard, like actually there. But at the same time, as a GM, you could be like, the rogue says that okay, you're in a hallway. There's a guard looking away from you holding a torch, and you'll be like, okay, it's a stone hallway. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put these pads at the base of my the soles of my shoes, and I'm going to creep along in a crouch, like running along the wall, so that way I can steady myself with my hand if need be, and also tiptoe over to him and then stab him in the back. Like, if somebody said that to me, I would say like, okay, fine, just make an attack roll.
Yeah, it's just adding flavor. Like a good example of when that's kind of a thing it is what we like to call the Shiv moment. It's a thing that's I think is exclusive to like mine, yours, and Jesse's games,
Well,
with the exception of Brett.
okay, the shiv moment. Like anyone can do a shiv moment. There just has to be met certain criteria in order to officially, like, quote unquote, activate it. And
Yeah,
that's asking an innocuous question to the GM that doesn't even seem relevant to the situation at hand, and then doing something crazy out of control and having it succeed.
yeah, like a beautiful example 2 nights ago. I will typically say, so Nick, and it's that expectation, like, okay, he's gonna do something kind of off the wall, but it's not gonna
Hmm.
be an actual Shiv moment.
Right. Part of it is like when somebody says, "Okay, I want to do this," then the GM has to go through the stages of, "Oh, what the fuck is he doing?"
Yeah. So the question that I had asked was, so Nick, what are these bricks made out of? And what's the mortar made out of? He's like, sandstone.
Right, because
What are you
it's
doing?
the middle of a combat in an open town, and he's asking what the fucking walls are made of. So I tell him, and
And then Kenton runs along the wall because he can just run along walls and shit because he's a higher level monk. And he runs along the rooftop and using like spent a key point, made an attack roll, double foot kicks this brick along its edge to launch it off the roof and onto this bobsled pulled by a scorpion, where these two dudes were, and we're trying to get them to stop. And Kenton single-handedly with a building broke their sled, so they had to stop and actually fight.
side note, it's a desert environment, so they were gliding
Oh
on
yeah,
sand like that. I feel that's important to note.
yeah, that's totally important. But yeah, that's an example of
Right, but that's
a good
ridiculous and
shit
out of control,
moment.
but it worked, and it was amazingly hilarious when it was executed. Now, switching gears a bit, we've talked about player and character metagaming. Let's talk about something that isn't really talked about in a lot of ways, and that's the GM, the Game Master metagaming, which is totally a thing. And if I don't know about you in particular, Xander. I don't know if you've ever realized you were doing this when you were playing a game, but I've noticed that I have done it a couple times, and I've gotten close to doing it a couple times. Now, what this is, a good example of a GM metagaming is the monsters of the game being able to know what the players and the characters can do and what they have at their disposal. The example that I was alluding to when I spoke to you earlier, Xander, was the fight with the Ling Spider, Alphabet Soup, that guy. Uh, the name that's so complicated, you just fuck it, whatever. When
Side
he,
note: it was a reoccurring character named Srgnefkid, but it was Dick Fingers spelled backwards, and
that's right.
he'd said it like a few thousand
I
times,
even spelled it out in chat, and nobody read it backwards, and it was
and nobody
hilarious.
got it. Nobody
Dick
got it
Fingers,
until the very end, and we were like,
the
"What?"
return of Dick Fingers, and his quest to enslave all of mankind. But anyway, one of the things that he did is when it's a big spider monster that's also like Cthulian if you don't know what it is. Uh, it can bite you, and as part of that bite, it inflicts a poison, which is a not only very lethal poison because it does con damage per round, but it is also have a pretty high DC in order to on your Constitution check to negate, and even and if you get inflicted by, you have to have two consecutive successes in a row. It's pretty nasty. Now, at one point, I attacked Kenton and hit him with that bite. I completely forgot that you are actually just immune to poison now.
Yep,
So
yeah, and disease too.
that's right. But if I was metagaming as the GM, maybe that spider would have instead of attacked a person that could be affected by that. The spider wouldn't know that you're immune to poison. He doesn't even know who you are.
Yeah, we're just some random guys that suddenly just showed up at his house, fucked with a bunch of his homeboys and little slave guys, and was like, "Hey, we're gonna kick your ass now." And he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm super tough spider guy. Oh shit, you got my amulet. No!" And he doesn't know that
Yeah, he
Ken
doesn't know
is.
you're immune to poison. He doesn't know you even have key at that point. Uh,
He
but
finds out quick though.
but like that that small thing, if I had like looked at your character sheet and been like, oh yeah, you're immune to poison. I don't want to waste this thing, and then directed somewhere else. That's metagaming. Monster doesn't know. Now, on the contrary, let's say the main villains or like big bads of the campaign, they might know about that because there's a lot of ways if you're gonna just like the players can kind of get through a certain level of quote unquote metagaming or like player skill in game, the GM needs to be able to do that from their end too. So if your bad guy knows about the players, why do they know? Is it due to an information network that their spies have been like, we saw them being able to cast seventh level spells, so be prepared for that. They use this, this, and this. Or have they been scrying on the party? Uh, have the party been scrying on other people? Have what use the in-game mechanics to also narrate how your bad guys and your NPCs know or don't know about what the players can do. Basically, I'm saying the GM needs to follow the rules. I think that's the short version.
Yeah. A good another place where GMs can do it, but this is one of those moments where it's kind of positive. That's a good thing. Um, Nobody wants to die in a D&D game. No, nobody wants their character to
Well,
die.
nobody
Now,
wants to die in any RPG game.
well, yeah, nobody wants to die. And people become very connected to their characters, and player death is really hard to deal with. We'll cover that in another podcast here soon. But player character death is should be reserved for a moment when it's going to be most impactful, because it could tell a good story too. And sometimes I know that Jesse had actually covered this at one point in time. Fudging a roll it's also metagaming, but it can have positive consequences. And as a GM, you can choose to stick straight with the dice and not let anything. It's like, well, you got hit with 136 cold damage, so yeah, you're fried. But you can take it one step back and just make it a really tense moment. Like, they got hit with it. It's still going to do some damage. It probably knocks them out, but it doesn't outright kill them. So you say you take 86 points of damage because you know that it's not going to double their maximum hit points from where they are at current. So they don't die outright, and then they start doing their death saving throws. This gives the other players chance to dump a potion down their neck or stabilize them with magic or whatever. Now the combat's still going on, and it's really hard. Things are really, they're happening, and it's a really tense moment. And oh my god, things are going for shit. But the dice said, dude was dead, and he's not coming back, short of a true resurrection spell. So it's metagaming in some ways has a positive connotation as a GM, and it's important for you to balance where you want to be for the game, for the setting, for the players that you're going to be dealing with. Sometimes players want straight up what the dice say,
And
and we
with a
covered that
stipulation on
before.
this needs to be a decision you make before you start the game. If you are going to be like, maybe player death isn't so prevalent, maybe don't need to be as lethal, balance your game around that, and stick to it. If you go in saying, okay, like Shadowrun for example, this is a lethal ass game. If you fuck up, you will die. You need to stick with your guns.
Yeah, totally. My characters have
Like
died.
when Slick died.
Yeah, that was a fast fucking.
Hmm.
He was booking it
He
though.
went from 0 to dead very quickly.
Yeah, he got shot with a fucking missile, man. That'll dead you. That'll get you dead fast. But that uh, pro tip, as a player character, do not attempt to fight a giant mechanical robot with a cockpit and an AI, missiles, and guns of high caliber and lethal damage with a sword. You're probably not gonna get anywhere. You're probably not.
You didn't,
Just
that's
saying.
for sure.
Nah, totally. I bit it hard, but dude, it gave one of the greatest like moments. Freaking Jesse's character just freaking blew him up with that Barrett.
Oh yeah, but uh,
Just blew him to
a,
pieces.
a good moment indeed. But another maybe positive aspect to a GM metagaming. So the one of the things I like to do, in order to try to prevent this, but also have it in a roundabout way activate, is so I try to forget certain aspects of the character sheet that my players have. Not like the big important stuff, but that way I won't accidentally um, start maybe moving monsters. And let's say wizard has a fireball. They like that fireball. They want to use that fireball. You have a bunch of fucking orcs or something. Uh, Maybe you know that they want to use this fireball, so whether consciously or not, you spread those orcs out a little bit, even though the orcs wouldn't know about that fireball. So that way they don't just wipe in one shot. However, that something important to make note of is let the characters use the cool shit and the goodies that they have.
Oh
Otherwise,
yeah,
what's the point? Like,
yeah.
let's go back to Kent because you were there 2 days ago when those guys, the raiders, when they fired arrows at you, you get to grab the arrow out of the air and hit somebody else with it because you just can as a monk.
Because monks are badass.
And like, sure, I could have just made all the raiders melee based or something like that, but putting the archers in let you do those attacks where you grab the arrow. It's something awesome that you do, and then you influence the battle with it. Uh,
Yeah.
Similarly, you want to let people be able to use their spells that they burn their entire slot to do.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The goodies for a character, like these these are what it's about having stats for. Like you can sit down and run a role playing game and have a personality and a character and everything drawn up and no stats at all, and it'll be successful. But there's an aspect of both playing and running a game that when you get cool stuff that you can do, you want to use it. So as a matter mage in Mage the Awakening, you want to be able to dissolve that doorknob so that you can get in, and that's the thing that you do. Or you're a space mage. You like to teleport around. You want to use your powers. You want to use your abilities, and so as a GM, you have to take into account that the characters can do those things. Like don't be like, well, I'm just gonna ignore that they can do those things. Oh God, all my guys are dead. What the hell? But that those kinds of instances allow you to ramp up your bad guys just a little bit. Because Kenton, he can grab an arrow out of the air and chuck it at somebody else, and it does, yeah, anywhere from I think it's like 6 is the minimum to a 12 maximum damage, which is pretty good. But these guys have like 30, 40 hit points, so that arrow is not really going to take them out. And if he did that to a regular Joe on the street in the game, that guy's done. He's nobody will touch that stake done. So uh, balance is key and important, but don't be afraid to let your characters have some fun, because after all, it's one of the reasons we play. I
Right.
hate to admit it, the stats are important. They really are.
Yeah, I mean that's why they're there. But like
Yeah.
you don't want to say no or like not make any of their stuff ever relevant as a GM. Like if you got the cool arrow catching thing, if you have that and then nothing ever does a ranged like weapon attack against you, then that's boring. It's an entire thing you got from leveling up that's just.
Yeah.
But
And
you can also
as
use those same things that maybe you don't like having some of those abilities in the game. And well, the first thing you could always do is you could straight up just talk to the player, be like, "Hey, you took this thing. I didn't realize it was going to be that powerful, and maybe it's like a spell, like a high level spell. It's like I don't know how I can challenge you with this. Like you're able to solve all the problems pretty much instantaneously. maybe could you dial it back a little bit? And then
Yeah.
you're discussing it out of game. Like they might take the spell off. Like if, and then you could kind of like never be afraid to be like, I can't handle this. Like I don't know what's going on with this thing. Like it's partly why it's important to read
Oh
up
yeah.
on everything. But if and to know your setting, because a lot of times when this happens is because something in a setting or a theme is it is still part of the rules, but it's introduced and you weren't prepared for it.
Yeah. That's one of those moments where being cognizant of the fact that you're drowning is really important because as GMs we get a kick out of this. This is just as much a hobby for us as you guys playing.
Well, you know my
So,
stance. The GM is a player. Not in
oh
the
yes,
sense that
totally.
you have a GMPC and you're rolling around with the party like as a character, but you sitting at the table, running the game, making the plans, doing all this prep work. You are a player. You are there to have fun just as much as they are.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And because we're there to do cool stuff and tell a good story, uh, it's really it's really easy for us to allow that internal clock to shut down because when you first start a campaign you're really excited and you do all of this prep work and you bust out 30 documents of stuff that you're going to do and you're not going to use all of it, but you're pumped and you're ready to go 6 months into the campaign and you've got nothing. You're hitting GM burnout and you don't know what to do. It's there's a lot of ways to handle that, and I don't know if we've already covered it or we're going to
We're
cover it.
going to cover it.
Going to cover it. Gotcha. So we'll cover GM burnout at a later date, but be aware and be honest with yourself and allow that problem to be addressed and be honest with your players about it because if you're not having fun doing it and you can't devote the time and the energy to make it worth what the purpose for it in the first place, then the players are probably not going to have as much fun, and you'll begin to resent the work that comes along with it. So being aware of that and pacing yourself well, and if you think you can only handle a game every
I
month,
mean, like
do it once a month.
it's less about a timing thing, but more about like you should always be able to approach your players on this, and vice versa. They should be able to
Oh,
approach you.
absolutely.
You're all friends sitting at a table doing make believe. If you're not, then what the hell are you doing there? But like
Yeah.
if anybody has a problem, it should be a pretty open discussion.
Oh yes, absolutely. And it's not bad as a GM to recognize that both in yourself and in your players, and more importantly, use that to help you uh, run your game. And this is where it kind of ties in to metagaming. If you know that you're running short on time or that you just don't have enough stuff to prep for it, uh, you're being aware of that is metagaming, but it's necessary and relevant to the flow of the story. It's what keeps the GM on track, and it's a really, really hard thing to combat against when trying to be a GM,
But again, a little
because
honesty
yeah,
goes a long way because you could just be like, "Hey, I didn't think you'd solve this so quickly. I didn't think you'd defeat this encounter so much. I actually didn't have this particular thing you want to do right now prepared. I'll need some time. Would it be okay if you just go ahead and go on this kind of like maybe quest that you already have planned out rather than like going like way to left field to go to another town that I have on the map that I didn't really even plan for yet?"
yeah. Now, a pro tip for y'all at home: if you're gonna be a GM and it's your first time, something that I've picked up over time is I like to have a back pocket, and that back pocket will have 3 or 4 encounters in it. Nothing really big, nothing really important. Sometimes it's relevant to the story, but sometimes it's not. But it's just something that the players can do that you can on the fly chuck into an instance. Like, for example, I was running a Thursday game some time ago. I think you guys remember me talking about it.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, the game has been on hiatus for a while because I like to have time to do things and prepare for it properly. So there's that. But uh, one of the encounters that the players went on, they're like, "All right, well, I'm gonna go here and do this thing," and I kind of froze there for a second. I was like, "Oh shit,
Oh yeah, I remember that when we were
wait."
when you had the ruins in between where we were and where we were going to go, and we were like, we want to stop here
Exactly.
and check this out, and you're like, uh-oh.
And I created a couple of maps on the fly. I put a whole bunch of stuff in there. I tied in some stuff for the plot line. I gave us some cool little tidbits of story and everything. And all of this stuff I had pre-prepared, but it wasn't for those places. It was for somewhere else. So I had to kind of rewrite those other places on the fly. Or I had to rewrite those places on the fly while they were basically walking to it, so that they would have content and have something to do with their choice. And I can always rewrite that town on the western end that they didn't decide to go to, even though I pushed into it. I could redo that later
Right.
because that's part of your prep.
And
So have a
even
couple of tricks in your pocket.
right, and even when it doesn't, and when it doesn't come to like actual in-game content, this is more timing related, not really so much to do with metagaming. But I know I've done this several times where it's like I look at the clock and it's like, oh shit, they are not as far as I want them to be, or I thought they would get much further than this, and be like, okay, I know we're about to do a combat. I know I literally just described us starting a combat. We will probably want to save this until next time because it's late.
Yeah, that was actually the kind of cliffhanger for not last week, but not this week, but the week before. We were about to fight said raiders, who, what Kenton broke off a piece of some dude's roof to bash them with. Uh, but timing just wasn't really
Right.
there.
It was
So
midnight, and some of us are even in different time zones. So
yeah,
it's like, okay, here's the deal. We are going to do this, but let's save it. Or even the most recent time, like after that combat, like it was getting late again, like it does, and I just ended up like describing the kind of end scene where you're going towards that banquet that you're about to go into, even though that was
yeah.
kind of supposed to be part of the game. You don't have to be like straight up. You don't always have to say like, "Hey, I'm out of time," or whatever. You could just be like, "All right, let me find a good wrap-up point. Let me narrate this in play
Oh
to
yeah,
the end, and then you leave on a cliffhanger if you need to. I mean, TV shows do it. Why can't you?
yeah.
Hell, movies do it for some fucking reason.
But,
Uh,
but I left a game hanging on a cliffhanger that was like a kick in the balls for you guys, and it's
oh
been
no.
like 6 months because I can't dedicate the time to it.
Right, right.
So you know,
No,
but
that's fine.
yeah, it's like that.
But if you're ever in a situation and well, let's talk about like how to maybe address metagaming.
Oh yeah,
So this is this is pretty much something that is going to happen out of play. If you see if you're a player or you're the GM and you see somebody metagaming, you don't have to like come down like a fucking hammer the first time that happens. Like you
yeah,
and if some of the more like not as forthcoming players. Maybe charismatic is the right word. Maybe like they're shy or
uh,
something. Like don't like address it at the table. Like if you're at the table, you're in the middle of the game. Don't like unless it's like really game breaking, then
yeah.
you don't need to bring it up. Just be like, okay, cool. Let's put it on the back burner. Let's finish the game. Then at the end of the game, take them aside and be like, hey, I saw you doing this. It's like not really all that cool. You could also say that to the GM. Like, be like,
Oh totally.
hey, I noticed that every single one of uh, this role I was attempting to make somehow failed. Why is that? And they have all sorts of reasons. Like, but I mean, usually the problem is immediately addressed just by bringing it up. You're like, hey, I saw
Oh
you
yeah.
did this, and I'll be like, oh shit, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah, because metagaming is one of those things that we do it unconsciously. Everybody will do it. It's not a cardinal sin to do it. There's some of the best GMs out there. People that do Twitch streams, people that do YouTube videos, people that do all kinds of things. Me, Nick, everybody, every GM does this. So don't feel bad if you do, unless it becomes a problem. And if your players do it once in a while, uh, it might not be that big of a deal. And if it's like something minor, like they know that the dirt in the area that they're going to is a little bit soggier, so they
The
decide
fuck?
that their character is wearing like
It's a
they're heading
very
towards a place where
specific
they know there's
example.
a like on an out of play level, they hear that um, when you do some descriptions or like an opening scene, like the waters flooding into the cavern, blah 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 blah. Someone you know is about to die. This time on Legends of, like it's the players didn't know that, the players didn't see that, but Kenton decides to put on knee-high boots because Xander knows because of the epilogue or the prologue that there's a cave full of water and he doesn't want to get his feet wet.
Right. I mean, shit, everybody
It
will do
doesn't
something
matter.
like that. It really does. I mean, like, there's not really much benefit to being like, I need to go to the store to buy some fucking knee-high leather boots or whatever. Like, if you have them already, if you somehow have them meta-wise, then it's like, all right, who cares? Like, it doesn't slow down the story.
Yeah,
It doesn't have any impact. Now, if for some reason these boots have like magical water walking there, like, whoa, 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 calm down there, Chief. I don't remember you
yeah,
getting that. But
yeah. Or they go looking for water walking boots because they know they're going to have to deal with it on an out of play level. You're like, eh.
yeah, it's just like if they hear anything about it, like a swamp or something in play, that's a reasonable thing to be
Oh
to
yeah,
for them to be like, well, we need some stuff to prevent like water damage and shit like that.
yeah. Like a good example is earlier today I was talking to you about going to the Underdark with Kenton and the gang for your Monday game, and I brought up that Daikatana, one of the player characters, Nyx, in fact, uh,
He's not a
does
player
not have.
character. He's an NPC that you guys like carrying along with you.
Yeah,
He's
well,
just
he's cool.
important to the story now.
Yeah, he's dope as hell. But he doesn't have the ability to see in the dark, and we're going to the Underdark. Fortunately for Kenton, he knows that he's going to the Underdark. He doesn't know what's down there, but he knows that's what's down in this hole. Now,
It
if
says the word
he'd never
dark in
heard
the
it,
name.
yeah, if he'd never heard of the Underdark and like they'd never met any of the Drow or whatever, he's like, all right, this is giant hole. It might just be a small cave system. Let's go check it out. It bring a couple of torches, not a big deal.
Well, I
But
mean, like
you know
I see the point you're getting to, and it's in-game prep work does not equal metagaming.
that is correct. As long as there's a reasonable conclusion in character that your character would come to, and general knowledge typically can be applied to this. So as a GM, kind of balance it, make sure it's not getting too out of hand, but also not uh, going to be so strict about you can't do that
I mean,
because it's
as a
metagaming.
player, you can always ask, would my character know this? And as a GM, conversely, you should be basically asking yourself that question in regards to your NPCs. Does this Mason know what colored dragons are which?
Yeah, yeah, that's it's an important distinction to make, and as a GM, you kind of got to be responsible for that. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of responsibility, and it's very rewarding uh, responsibility. So yeah, but totally go be a GM.
I
We
mean,
endorse it.
oh, hold on, I gotta bring this up because I just remembered this. There,
Ah,
there is an instance where the metagame and the in-game are one and the same. I may have mentioned the game before. The End of the World. This is. Have you ever played that, Xander? You ever
um,
even heard of it?
Wait, is that the one where it's like an endless game?
No. Basically, the end of the world is well, I mean, it's obviously a tabletop RPG where you stat out and play yourself, where
Ooh.
the game begins at the gaming table, and then some
Oh
shit goes
wow.
down, whether it's a zombie apocalypse, an alien invasion, or something that brings an end to the world. And you play yourself. Your equipment is what's in the goddamn room.
Dude,
So
we
when
we gotta play this sometime.
when Jesse and I played that with Will, um, we were like, okay, we need to get some stuff. What do we have? Like, we need armor. Since we're nerds, walked to the bedroom, grabbed a fucking like Jesse had this leather arm piece that like completely covered from shoulder to hand, and like weapons, we got knives. Like
Yeah,
nobody, none of us had a gun, so we don't have a gun unless we find one in play. And everything we described is just like, I know about this out of play, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it in play, and completely seamless, and it was great fun.
dude, that sounds
Stipulation
awesome.
for if you ever play this game, I would recommend, and this is something that I did when I ran this game too. Don't play unless you really want to, and everybody at the table's cool with this. Don't play like the really hard role play of like losing your family and your friends and all that shit because it's the apocalypse. Like instinctually you're gonna want to do that, like call your parents and all that, jazz. But unless everybody, including the GM's, cool with that, then that puts a really harsh tone to the entire game that's supposed to be fun. Because then all of a sudden the GM's like trying to roleplay your parents that they may or may not have ever met, or it becomes. The first time I played this, it became really depressing, and I almost didn't want to play the game again.
Yeah, that's a really good caveat to add to there. Uh, so yeah, don't do that.
Unless you
And
want, unless you want to, and everyone's cool with it, and then that's pretty much the lay of the land for any time you sit down to play a tabletop game with somebody.
yeah, I think we've actually covered it it's on a couple of different occasions. I think Jesse touched on it. Some games, more specifically, Jesse's game one on one, had a lot of themes that most players wouldn't be okay with. So it's a really good idea to talk to your players about these kinds of things beforehand.
Right, which we
And
talked about in the setting
yeah,
up to run a game episode.
yeah, it's really really important.
Communication's
So
key. Pretty
com-
simple. I mean, the
communication is absolutely key.
95% of the game is talking to each other anyway, so why not just do it a little bit out of play? And I hope that's given you all some meta food for your meta thought. So think on that. Until next time on Playing God.